Okay, well, look, we'll get started, and people are joining as we go. So welcome along to this third webinar of the series for the Give It Up for Gut Cancer Challenge with day 13. So I hope everybody's had a good week and maintaining their whatever you're giving up, sugar, alcohol, or the sofa. So thank you for joining us. Tonight we have a couple of guest speakers. We have got Sean Robertson from 4 Wheels of Health, who'll be talking about gut health, the microbiome, the impact of sugar and alcohol on your gut microbiome. And we'll be answering any questions you might have at the end of the session. But firstly, I'd like to introduce Liam Willis, who is the Executive Officer of the Gut Cancer Foundation. He's joining us to talk about the impact of the funds that you're raising through the Give It Up Challenge. Just before coming on board, checked where we're at, and over $135,000 has been raised so far. So huge thanks to everyone. So I'm going to hand over to Liam. He's going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes about the impacts and the research that the funds raised through this campaign are funding. And then we'll hand over to Sean to talk about the gut microbiome. So Liam, over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, everybody. Right, just before we get started, I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me 2 seconds. And Sue, can you just confirm that this is showing okay?
Yep, that's fine. We're seeing that okay.
Awesome. Okay, so tēnā koutou katoa, ko Ingarari te whakapaparanga mai, ko Berry, Greater Manchester, te whenua tupu. Ke Auckland o e noho ana, he Executive Officer o i Gut Cancer Foundation, ko Liam Willis tako whenua, tēnā tātou katoa. So good evening, everybody. My name is Liam Willis and I'm the Executive Officer for the Gut Cancer Foundation. And I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you to everybody on this webinar for your incredible work you've been doing this month for Give It Up. It's been an inspiration to see everything that everybody's been doing, the money raised, and the impact that you guys will have is going to be amazing. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. It's just a little bit about your impact, a very brief overview of the work that we do here at GCF, and then just a bit of focus on the research element of our strategy, so you guys can get a real understanding of the of where your money will go and the impact that it will make for New Zealanders. So this is just a very broad overview of our strategy. It's a strategy on a page, and as you can see, there are a few key areas to the work we do, leading research and innovation, which I'll go into in more detail, but it's important as well to make clear that we also raise awareness and provide education. So every we hold our Shine a Light awareness campaigns for each of the individual cancers, with esophageal cancer, for example, coming up in April. And we advocate as well. We're a voice for cancers of the digestive system, lobbying government and speaking out in the press for issues that we believe are important. And as you can see as well, equity and equitable access for all New Zealanders is key to our strategy. And none of this would happen without building a sustainable organisation. So your support and the fundraising is absolutely vital. But as I say, I did just want to concentrate at the moment on the research area of our work. And what we have done is really try and narrow down to a certain extent the areas that we concentrate on. And we have some research priorities, which you will see the first 2 being there really based around clinical trials and supporting clinicians to combine their clinical work with research projects, because we feel that research taking place in the clinical environment is really tangible and directly helps patients, as you'll see shortly and we'll talk to. It's not to say that we wouldn't look at funding lab-based research, and we have done, and I'll touch on that as well, but we really like to see a pathway into the clinic for that research as well. And as you can see, developing our workforce in New Zealand is key, and supporting Māori workforce and ensuring equitable outcomes, or we work towards equitable outcomes, is also vital for our research priorities. So when we talk about clinical trials, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about these are the studies that bring the bench, so the work that's done in the lab, to the bedside, directly into the clinic, so that patients can benefit immediately from this. So generally what we're doing is we're looking at funding trials that are testing new treatment options, testing a new way to deliver a drug, perhaps testing a new way to prevent some cancers or diagnose some cancers. In clinical trials, you have an experimental arm, which is the new drug, perhaps, versus what you would call standard of care. So that's what everybody generally would be getting in the population if they weren't on the trial. And you're testing it to see if the new option provides a better outcome. But clinical trials are expensive. I mean, we talk about clinical trials costing anywhere between $1,000 and $10,000 per person to get on this trial, to access the trial. And there's a big funding gap in New Zealand, which means that New Zealanders often miss out on trials, especially those that are generated overseas. What happens, for example, in Australia, there is money, if a trial is started in Australia, often it's with money that needs to stay in Australia. So we want to be part of these trials, we want to open the sites, but the clinicians and the hospitals here don't have access to the same pool of funding that the Australian clinicians and hospitals do. So we have to then step up as a third party and provide the funding that allows our clinicians, our hospitals to engage in these trials, and New Zealanders to access these clinical trials as well. We're also committed to, as well as the international trials and getting access to those, we really are committed to funding New Zealand initiated trials and research, and we'll touch on that a bit. And as it stands, this will become a lot more next year, but we've $315,000 committed to 92 patients accessing clinical trials, either that have closed or an analysis, or that are currently ongoing. So our past trials that we have funded here do include ones for bowel, rectal cancer, pancreatic, stomach, esophageal, and biliary tract. New treatment option for cholangiocarcinoma, that was. Those ones, some of those are either closed, they've been developed and gone on to new trials, or they're in analysis. There are 2 trials that we've funded at the moment that are in analysis, and we look forward to hearing of the results of those. And they constituted 45 patients that accessed those trials, got access to new treatments. We are currently committed to 4 different clinical trials that are spread across 6 different sites in New Zealand, and these alone are 47 patients that over the next 18 months will access new treatments and new potential preventative treatments in some instances. And these actually have been based a lot around pancreatic cancer recently, but in the year ahead, we will be diversifying again and looking at the different cancers that we can start funding. And we currently, as I say, have 47 patients that will access trials over the next 18 months at a cost of a commitment of over $250,000 from the Gut Cancer Foundation, which only happens because of the support we've received, particularly from past Give It Up campaigns. I just wanted to give you an example of a clinical trial so that you can kind of contextualize what it is that you're doing and the difference you'll make. So the Ascend trial, we are funding 19 patients across Auckland, Waikato and Dunedin. And this is a trial that's looking at a new treatment option or an additional treatment option for some of the most vulnerable patients in New Zealand, and those are the patients with advanced metastatic pancreatic cancer. So these are patients that can't go to surgery. Their disease is not curable, unfortunately, and the life expectancy, very sadly, is quite short for this particular group of patients. So we really need to have as many treatment options as we can. One of the reasons that this group of patients have really quite poor outcomes is the physiological nature of the tumor itself. And bluntly, in lay terms, the pancreatic cancer tumor wraps itself in fibrosis and kind of has a cocoon around it, which means when you try and treat it with chemotherapy, actually a lot of chemotherapy just passes it by. It can't penetrate this outside shell, and therefore the chemotherapy doesn't access those cells that we want it to. It doesn't kill those cells, and all it's doing is making the patient ill without actually having any impact on the tumor itself. Some incredibly clever people over in Australia have developed this drug, SEND1, and the idea with this is that you give this drug to patients prior to having chemotherapy, and it punches holes. I'm not quite sure how, but it punches holes in the outside of this tumor, and it makes it easier for the drug to actually get into the cells and have an impact and treat those cells, kill those cells, and therefore we hope the initial trial has showed prolonging the life of those patients that are accessing this treatment. And this is a group of patients that have a very few treatment options at the moment. One of the great things about this trial as well is actually, I said there's an experimental arm to trials and there's a standard of care. Well, everybody on this particular trial will receive a standard of care that includes this drug I've talked about here, nab-paclitaxel, which is not available in New Zealand. It's not funded. So anybody on this trial will receive a better standard of care, better treatment than they would otherwise receive without going on this trial. So look, you can see the real impact you can have by funding clinical trials. This is New Zealanders will access this trial and potentially have their life extended by having access to this trial, which would not have happened without support from our supporters. Just briefly as well, I did talk about the research that we funded that goes beyond clinical trials, and we have committed over $440,000 to 8 New Zealand research studies in the past, looking at preclinical research that could be teeing up a trial of the future, clinical studies and fellowships. Some significant investment went into research around colorectal cancer, microbiome as well. I know the topic of today, the microbiome of the tumours, and the environment, the microbiome and the environment of the HCC, which is a primary liver cancer tumour as well. And we had some, just kind of again put in context the impact of this work. Professor Peter Shepherd, who we funded a couple of years ago, was investigating new drug treatments for bowel cancer that is caused by a mutation in the BRAF gene, which is about 10% of bowel cancers, and it's quite an aggressive cancer. It's a difficult one to treat, but he's found in his lab-based research that there are a combination of drugs that are already funded, already available in New Zealand, that may be able to have greater outcomes for the patients. And he's now at a stage where that's been published, it's been recognised, and we're potentially looking at trying to get that into a clinical trial. Briefly as well, Thymine-2, really good example of a clinical study that could have impact. So one of the main drugs that are used to treat a lot of gut cancers is 5-FU, and the issue with it's a very good drug, but the issue with it is that it does cause quite a bit of toxicity and reaction in quite a number of patients. And in the worst case scenario, that reaction can actually be life-threatening. The Thymine-2 study is developing a test that you can do to test patients before they have their chemotherapy treatment, to find out and to work out whether or not they would be susceptible to this toxicity. So before they even get the treatment, we potentially can use this test to work out whether or not it will make somebody too ill to have it. And then the doctors can either adjust the dose accordingly, or there may be an alternative therapy that they could be put on. And it could potentially save all manner of issues for patients that may otherwise have had a toxic reaction, and in the worst case scenario, may even have had a life-threatening reaction to it. So, you know, this is a study that's currently in analysis. There was 170 patients that were on the study that we tested. And we were able to top up a grant that was made by the Health Research Council to give this study a clinical trials manager that meant they could go to lots of different sites around New Zealand and recruit the number of patients that they could. And that actually was funded from the first year of Give It Up. That wouldn't have happened without Give It Up. So we're really excited about seeing the outcome of Thymine-2 and hopefully having a test that will provide better outcomes for a number of gut cancer patients who use this 5-FU drug. So finally, just a quick word on future funding. So overall, we in clinical trials, we've committed to 98 patients getting access to clinical trials, and the combination of trials and research commitment has been over $800,000. As I say, at the moment, we've got $250,000 committed to clinical trials, but next year we want to commit an additional $250,000. So next year we'll be looking at funding new clinical trials and new research projects, at least to the value of another $250,000 on top of the commitments that we've already got. We'll have a competitive grant round where clinicians and researchers can apply to us for funding, but we'll also have, we'll proactively go out and seek clinical trials that we think will most benefit New Zealanders who are impacted by gut cancers as well. Now, that figure of 250,000 is a minimum level, and it is absolutely true to say that the more money we raise and Give It Up, the bigger that figure will go. It will go directly into our research pot for next year and will directly fund Kiwis to get access to these clinical trials that not only are moving the dial in terms of global advancements on how to treat patients with gut cancers, but are literally now giving access to New Zealanders. It's giving access to these trials, giving them new patients opportunities, new options right now. So your impact is huge. It's massive, and it is hugely appreciated. I'm giving up myself. I'm giving up all three, and I'm finding it tough. So I have every ounce of respect for everything you guys are doing, and hugely appreciative of all the hard work that you're putting in. And I hope I've been able to give you a little overview of the impact that you are making. I'm going to stop now, and I will hang on around for the rest of the webinar. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I will be around at the end to answer them. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Sean, who's going to talk about gut health and the microbiome. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Thank you very much, Liam. As you can see, it is what you're doing having a huge positive impact to the community in terms of gut health, and what Liam and Sue and the team are doing for providing that for people who normally wouldn't have it in New Zealand. So it's really, really awesome. And the other side of what you're doing here, by actually giving these things up, and this is kind of my part to play here, is you are improving your own health. You're improving your own gut health specifically through these different things that we're doing. So for the gut microbiome, and there'll be a couple of things here that I have already said in the previous seminars, so apologies for repeating, but it is important for context. So when it comes to your gut health and the microbiome, which is basically just a collection of bacteria that live inside of you, there's some things to note. One, the amount of bacteria that live in your gut microbiome is about 100 trillion cells. Now, compared to you, you are made up of 10 trillion. So you as a being are actually, and if we're talking cell count, 10 times more bacteria than you are human. So what this means is the relationship between you and the bacteria that live in your gut is hugely important for your own health. The amount that your gut bacteria do for you in order to keep you the happiest and healthiest version of yourself is tremendous. And it's a two-way street. The thing is, the bacteria that you have inside of you, they can only do for you with what you provide for them. And this is really, really important for gut health, and even leading into like gut cancers and anything like that, because the largest collection of your immune system cells is around your gut. So the healthier your engine, the healthier your gut is, the stronger your immune system is going to be. And of course, your immune system is your military. That is your fighting defense against things like cancer cells from developing. So if you have a healthy gut, then you are going to have a strong immune system, and you're going to be far better off at preventing these things from ever coming up. And that's why it's so important to learn these things, which I hugely appreciate you guys for joining in on these seminars and trying to understand a bit more about gut health, because you knowing this and you passing this on to others and this knowledge spreading is going to be vital for the future of gut health throughout New Zealand and the world. Now, in terms of what actually affects your gut microbiome, so yes, it is what you eat, of course, because what you eat is also going to be what your bacteria eat. So if you eat lots of vegetables, fiber, antioxidants, lots of plants, basically, then your bacteria are going to be very happy because that's their food. And if they're happy and they're eating, then they are turning their food into other resources and nutrients for you that do you really, really well for your own health. But if you are feeding your gut microbiome things that aren't so healthy, like sugars or alcohol, these things that we're giving up, maybe you're doing all of them together, this will have an impact on your gut microbiome as well, because alcohol is not only damaging to, we use alcohol to clean surfaces, right? We can use alcohol to clean things in our house, because what it does is it dissolves, it destroys bacteria. So if you are constantly putting alcohol into your system, then you're making life very, very difficult for your gut microbiome and the good bacteria that live in there. It's not a fun time for them. And in terms of sugars, your good bacteria, because you have good and bad that live inside of you, your good bacteria, they don't process sugars like that. They don't use sugars for fuel. They use fiber and antioxidants, the healthy things. The bad bacteria, or what you can call parasitic bacteria, the ones that live inside of you, but they don't produce anything good for you. They don't help your health. In fact, they actually produce things that make your health worse. So if you are providing sugar to these bad bacteria, it means they will grow and thrive and make life more difficult for your good bacteria by out-competing them. So this is where giving up alcohol and sugar, it's not just to give up some things that we enjoy and we have from time to time. It's not just about giving things up that we're used to having. It's actually about giving things up that are going to have a very direct impact on improving our health, but specifically our gut health. So we're not just helping others with their gut issues that are obviously quite far down the line and need urgent help, right? They're at the ambulance bottom of the cliff kind of area. We're also doing preventative measures for ourselves and the people around us. So it's impactful in both ways. You're doing it for others, but also yourself and the ones close to you. So for alcohol specifically, it's not just that it has a negative impact on the good bacteria that you have in your gut. There are also other areas of your health that you are improving by giving it up. And this is not to say give up alcohol, give up sugar for life, never touch it again. That's pretty unrealistic, but all things in moderation. And it's important to understand when you have alcohol or sugar, the impact that it is having on you and your gut microbiome, just so that you have an informed choice. At each point, we're not going to sit here and tell you what to do, but if we can provide this information and you understand what the impacts are, it means at all times you have the choice to make of, I'm okay with a little bit of these downsides for the temporary pleasure that you get from it, and then you can decide how often you are okay with that choice. I will still have alcohol and sugars sometimes. Liam will, Sue will, of course, but it's just about regulating yourself and deciding what is going to be an appropriate amount based on how healthy you want to be and where that balance lies for you. So when it comes to alcohol, one of the things that it affects is actually in terms of your physical output. So your muscle mass, your body composition. This is it's not well understood, the severity of the impact that alcohol has on your body fat and your muscle tissue. So one thing that happens when you drink alcohol is your protein synthesis, right? It's a bit of a mouthful, but it drops by up to 50% when there's alcohol in your system. And what this basically means is that you have to produce proteins and build proteins in the body to repair your cells, to keep cell structure, to produce hormones, everything for digestion, everything that functions in the body, it requires proteins, including your muscle tissue. So in order to maintain more lean muscle tissue, and this doesn't mean bodybuilding, it just means keeping a healthy amount of muscle tone, basically. It's much harder when there's alcohol in your system constantly, because if your protein producing ability is cut in half, that's your protein productivity, it's cut in half each day because you're having a couple of beers after work or a glass of wine, then it's constantly setting you back and less muscle mass means less energy burned per second of every day, which means it's harder to burn off body fat. Now, in the same topic, but on the other side of things, with body fat, and this is very, very important to understand, especially for when you're going out for like social activities and there's a few drinks involved. When there is alcohol in your system, your body actually treats it as a nutrient. But because alcohol is technically a toxin or a poison to the body, which is obviously why you get a hangover, it's not good for us, right? It just gives us a buzz. It gives us funny effects. When you've got alcohol in your system, your body will prioritize it over everything else for burning through, right? It has to digest and break it down into energy in order to process it. When this is happening, all of the other energy that is coming in the form of carbohydrates, that's also sugars, fats, proteins, these things will be stored. It's almost like your body is saying, okay, there's alcohol, a poison inside the body, and we need to deal with this now. We're going to put everything else into storage and deal with it later. And this is why it is so much easier to gain weight if you are drinking, especially if there is alcohol alongside your meals. So, it's a classic. If you're going out to drink, you're going to have some wedges, some chips. It's usually carbohydrates that you have with it, not knowing that all those carbohydrates are just going straight into storage because you're drinking at the same time. And even then, in the alcohol that we have in wine, it's very high sugar. Beer, very high sugar. You can get cocktails, very high sugar. So all of these sugars are going into storage. And for weight loss or weight maintenance may not be a priority for you. That may not even be on your mind, but it is for some of us. And it's important to understand that alcohol, simply by giving this up, even if you're not touching the other areas like the classic ones like exercise and nutrition, simply by giving up alcohol, this is going to be something you benefit from. You are going to find it easier for weight management or to lose weight. It's one of the key things that you want to look at first if this is an area of your health that you want to address. And obviously, we also know that the body composition that we have is directly related to cancers of the body and especially the cancers of the gut. So anything to do with weight loss is going to be beneficial for this area as well. Now, much like with sugar, alcohol is also a dopamine releasing agent, and I actually talked about this already in the previous seminar. So when we remove alcohol, we are giving up a dopamine releasing drug or a dopamine releasing substance. What this does for us initially is it gives us cravings. We're looking for something for the same dopamine hit. But what's actually happening is, as you're removing it, the stimulation that you need from dopamine to get the same buzz, it lowers. So you become more sensitive to dopamine. And what this means practically, because I know this can sound very nerdy and sciencey, but what this means practically in our everyday lives is that when you take out alcohol, or sugars for that matter, or severely reduce them, your overall enjoyment of anything in life, it could be doing the laundry, washing the dishes, taking a dog for a walk, spending time with your family or just friends, people in general. It can be, cleaning that. It can be the most mundane things, but you derive more enjoyment from everyday little things because you are more sensitive to dopamine. So these things that would normally release a very small amount of dopamine, and that gives you a buzz. It's your reward hormone. It's what makes you, one of the things that make you feel good in the body. It feels a lot better, and you don't normally get these kind of buzzes from doing these small things if you are dopamine resistant if you've been releasing too much, and it's normally because some of the main culprits are alcohol and sugar. So it's about quality of life. It's about how much you're enjoying your time on this earth, and this is why moderation is absolutely key. And hopefully one of the things that you experience by the end of this Give It Up challenge is just take note of how you feel. Do you feel just more vibrant, better in general? Are you seeing life, almost through a different lens? And it's a lot to do with the biochemistry in the brain, and these things that we're consuming are having a direct effect on that. So in terms of quality of life, it's hugely important in this area as well. And although we're all about gut health here, it's not to take away from the mental health aspects of life as well. So the key point here is the less you're drinking on a chemical level, the happier and more fulfilled you're actually going to feel. Even though, yes, drinking can be fun and it can be, quite a hoot. It's something that when it's reduced, on average, you're going to feel a lot more clear and a lot better. So it's definitely a key area that you can benefit from. Like I said, hopefully you experience that by the end of the Give It Up challenge, you're seeing exactly what I'm talking about. Now for sugar, as I mentioned, this is a main fuel source for the bad bacteria in the gut. And I'll elaborate a little bit on what I said about being a fuel for the bad bacteria. So the bad bacteria that live in our gut and the good ones, they live next to each other. But what happens to your gut health is directly impacted by how much of each of these different types of bacteria you have. If you have more good, which improving the health of your gut lining, they are going to be improving the strength of your immune system, keeping everything, your entire engine, in really good stead. And therefore, if you have a healthy engine, you have a healthy vehicle. You being the vehicle, the engine being your gut. So lots of good gut bacteria, great for your health. If you have more of the bad bacteria, that's going to cause out competing of resources for the good ones, which means the good ones don't thrive as much, they're not going to do as much for you, and your health is not going to be in such great shape compared to if the bad bacteria were in lower numbers. Now, the more sugar that you put into your body, the more you are feeding these bad bacteria. The more you feed them, the more they can outcompete the good ones, take up more of this precious real estate, which is your gut lining, and grow and grow and grow until eventually they are the things that are causing you to have really severe sugar cravings. They're manipulating you to be fed more sugar, right? They get hungry, they call out for sugar, then you crave sugars. So it's a self-perpetuating system. Lots of bad bacteria, they want sugar, they tell you to eat sugar, they grow, etc., etc. So it's kind of you're putting a doorstop in here by just knowing this. Because when you understand that these sugar cravings are coming from bad bacteria, and if you ignore them and you do not feed them sugars, then they are going to starve. And when the bad bacteria starve off, it leaves room for the good bacteria to grow. And you can see how this is more of a positive spiral upwards. Now, it's also about what giving up sugar is doing in your body. So you're giving up sugar and you're taking the sugar away from the bad bacteria. And it also means that you are taking away what these bad bacteria are producing. When they eat sugar, there's a byproduct, right? The good bacteria eat fiber, they produce serotonin, makes you feel good. They produce things to keep your health and keep you very healthy. The bad bacteria eat sugar and they produce alcohol, which is, by the way, why at a kids party and they're all filled up on sugars, all the cake and treats, they just seem to go absolutely nuts, because it's not just that they're on a sugar high, they're actually a little bit drunk, because when they eat so much sugar, a lot of it turns to alcohol. So that's why they're getting so silly. A sugar high is not just from sugar, it is also because the alcohol that is produced in your gut from the sugar fermenting from these bacteria. So just a fun little fact here. Now, some of the things that these bad bacteria produce when you're fueling them with sugar are these things called endotoxins. They get into the blood, they bind to the liver, and they cause your cholesterol to rise, which can mean that you go and get a blood test and your cholesterol is very high and you can't figure out why. A lot of the times, the people that are testing you won't know, because it's relatively new information, that it can actually just be from your gut health. It's not always to do with your actual cholesterol, from your diet or anything like that. It can actually just be from your gut health. It can be a chemical thing coming from these bad bacteria in the gut. There's another thing that happens, which I think a lot more of us can relate to, is they produce these things, these chemicals that actually bind to the brain and cause you to feel depressed. They're called cytokines. So when you're having a lot of sugar, and this is why when you have sugar, you have a high and then you have a low. And it's not, the low is not just like a sugar crash from insulin. The low is also from the depressive chemicals that these bad bacteria produce. So it's like the serotonin is like your happy hormone. It's what makes you feel happy. Cytokines, what these bad bacteria produce from sugar, are the opposite. They make you feel very anxious and depressed. So the more sugar you eat, because of how it works with your gut bacteria and your microbiome, what it means is the more sugar you eat, the more depressed on a chemical level you are going to feel. So if you don't feel that great mentally most of the time, this is probably an area that you want to look at more closely, is your gut health. Not just for your own health of your body, but the health of your mind as well. Because I don't know anyone that doesn't want to feel a bit better and, just every day feel a bit brighter. And it really comes down to your engine, your microbiome, and what's going on there with, and how it works with what you eat. So sugar is a really, really key component to this. Now, last couple of points on sugar. And I have said this, but I will reiterate because it's very important to understand. Sugar in the body triggers release of insulin. Insulin is the main hormone responsible for telling your cells to store energy, or in layman's terms, store body fat. So when you're reducing sugar, even if all the calories that you're having throughout the day, right, if we're going to talk about energy, even if all the calories were the same, if less of it is sugar, it means less insulin is being produced in the body, which means there is less of the hormonal signal for your body to store energy as body fat. So it makes regulation for weight management much, much easier, simply because you're not having the stimulus of sugar in your diet. And again, weight management is directly linked to gut cancers, specifically out of all cancers. So very, very, very important here. Now, the last kind of thing on here with sugars is, if you're removing them, what do you replace them with? Well, the first thing you can look at replacing them with is proteins. So proteins are only really used in the body on a demand basis. Anything excess, it'll just go straight through. So proteins are your building blocks. They are also directly required for a lot of your hormone production, your mood hormones included. So if you are switching out these sugars, right, you're removing the sugars because you're giving them up. But if you're replacing them with a little bit extra on your protein portions, then you're taking away the sugar, which is going to normally make you feel more depressed because of the bad bacteria in the gut, and you're not feeding them. But you're introducing more protein as a substitute, which is actually going to make you feel better. And as a small bonus, when it comes to having more protein in the diet, I know quite a few people who can sometimes struggle to keep warm, like in terms of body temperature, and always need to wrap up. But protein actually causes a lot of heat generation in the body. So especially during the colder months, having more protein on your plate is going to keep your body very, very warm, because just the nature of when your body is digesting and breaking protein down, it releases a lot of heat. So it's kind of like a little metabolic hack to keeping warm in the winter months, simply by having more protein. So that's, I mean, and you can just put into Google to find, high protein foods, but it's generally meats, eggs, nuts, seeds. There are some relatively high protein vegetables, but generally those are the things that you go after. The vegetarian options would be like tofu, tempeh, any kind of legume, those things. But having more of these high protein options in your diet is going to make giving up sugar a lot easier as well, because the way it works in the brain is it helps tell your brain that it is full, that it doesn't need to eat anymore. And this helps with the cravings that come with giving up sugar. So yes, it can be a bit of a mental battle, but if you are putting a bit more protein in your diet while you're giving up sugar, it's going to make things so much easier, it's not funny. And what that looks like is, instead of having, say, palm-sized serving of chicken breast, then just have a palm and then, a third more. It doesn't have to be a huge amount more, but just whatever you would put on your plate normally, put on another 33%, another third, and that's perfectly adequate to cover what you're normally missing for sugars. So that's it for the gut microbiome, alcohol, sugar. I hope that provides you with a bit of clarity around why it's important and why we have chosen to give these things up, and what it is actually doing for you in terms of your health. Now, obviously, each of these topics is a rabbit hole that you can go really, really far down. But just for the scope of today and us valuing your time, it doesn't all fit into this seminar as much as we would like to have everything in here. Now, Sue, there were some questions. There was a question that was a really good one from last week. And if there are any questions from today, let's get to them.
Okay, thanks so much, Sean. We've got a question came through the group last week, and that was around just some clarity around the recommendation that we're giving is to aim for 10 grams or less sugar per 100 grams. And I think there's been a bit of confusion with people obviously taking the challenge a little bit further and giving up some carbs, which you've referred to in your webinars as sugars. So just a little bit of clarity around that. I do want to stress that, there are no hard and fast rules with giving up sugar. It's what the aim of the campaign is, that any changes that you make are sustainable changes, and that we don't want you going to extremes through this month, so that come the 1st of April, you're just undoing all the good by going out and buying a load of chocolate and lollies and cakes and so on. So, this isn't just about giving it up for the month, it's about making some sustainable changes going forward. So did you want to comment a little bit more on that, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand the confusion, because I would have been talking specifically from a nutritionist point of view, not with the Give It Up challenge in mind and how you will be viewing this. So that's my fault for not making it more clear. So when it comes to looking at things and how much sugar is in the foods that we're having, it really depends on you and how you want to view it. So you can view it in two categories here. Giving up sugar, specifically just the sugars that are like simple sugars, right? Carbohydrates are technically sugars, they're just longer chains, they take longer to break down. So they are better for you, and the response that your body gets in terms of insulin, the effect on your gut microbiome, they are a better option, absolutely. It just depends if you want to go for just sugars or carbohydrates in general, and that's completely up to you. For I guess our official recommendation for the challenge would be just sugars. So when it comes to, if you're looking at just the Give It Up challenge, when you're looking at nutrition labels, per 100 gram or per 100 ml of serve, then look for sugars, total sugars, 10 grams or less, thumbs up. I mean, 5 grams or less would be even, that's the dream. Now, if you're wanting to take it, just one small step further, then you'd look at total carbohydrates and do the same thing. So that's the two categories that you can put it into, and there's absolutely no pressure to apply it to total carbohydrates if you don't want to do that. It's more of a it would make me happy for you rather than the official kind of scope of the challenge. But so officially, it's just focus on the where it says sugar on nutrition labels, but unofficially, from my biased nutritionist perspective and my want to make you as healthy as possible, then you would look at total carbohydrates.
No, that's great. Thanks for clarifying that for us, Sean. Now we've got another question, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning. If you have got questions for Sean or for Liam, who's still on the call, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So do put in your questions there. We've got a question from Kathy. I had quite severe bloating last week. Is this an expected side effect? I've not heard it mentioned anywhere. I've given up sugar and alcohol, which I normally have little of, and given up the couch. So bloating is...
Yeah, so it's a funny one here because everybody, and I've been doing this for 10 plus years, and everyone reacts initially, the first 2 weeks to a month and a half. Every single person reacts differently to these changes, right? Whether it's giving up alcohol and sugar, or whether it's like a full scope health change, everyone reacts differently. Some people, bloating will disappear in the first 2 weeks. Some people, they get bloating the first 2 weeks and then it goes away. It often comes down to, in this case, what you could call a metabolic stress. All right, so how you can get stressed at work, you can get stressed because someone is annoying you, you can get stressed because you're in traffic. That's all stress that gets internalized in the body, and your body doesn't process it any differently to a metabolic stress, like a chemical stress. So for example, changing what you eat, changing what your normal dietary habits are. If they normally include alcohol and sugars, then taking those away, it's a change. And your body loves routine. Your body loves to be able to predict what's coming. If your body knows that every single day or 5 days a week, there is a glass of wine and a chocolate bar coming, right? As well, a bag of chips or something that you're watching Netflix. You're having while you're watching Netflix after work. It's just an example. But if your body knows that's coming and it becomes a regular thing, that's what it expects. So that's what it chemically prepares itself for. And then all of a sudden you take that away and it kind of freaks out a bit on a chemical level. So all it will be is there are changes that have been made in a positive way, but your body hasn't expected them. So it kind of has this taken aback reaction on a chemical level, if that makes sense. It's just something you want to ride out. If it's something that you want to address directly when it comes to bloating, then it's actually sleep and your eating window, how often you're eating throughout the day. And this is a whole different lecture that we could do on this, but very, very briefly, what it means is make sure you are getting 8 hours of sleep a night. It is not just a random figure that people say that is just pulled magically out of the air. Your body is biologically designed to sleep 7.5, 8 hours a night, to get all of its what we call sleep cycles in. you do this and this affects certain hormones, this will reduce bloating. The other one is to reduce your eating window down to 8 hours a day. This is really, really effective for bloating because a lot of the bloating we have is us holding water. One of the easiest ways for us to hold water is when we hold sugars in the body. So following this eating window, it means that 8 hours a day is when you fit all of your food in. The rest of the day is just water or tea. And then that 16-hour window a day where you are fasting, basically, your body is just pulling sugars and therefore water out as well. So those are the two key things that you'd want to do, is focus on getting a full night's sleep and focus on eating within an 8-hour eating window. And if you wanted to read more about that, then, because this is not a subject for our seminars during Give It Up, but if you want to read more about it, it's called TRF, time restricted feeding. So if you just punch that into Google, it'll give you plenty of information about what it does for the body in terms of benefits and how to go about it in more detail.
Great, thanks, Sean. And nice segue there. Next week's webinar is all about sleep and the importance of sleep. So join us next week for next week's webinar for a little bit more, some more tips and guidance on getting a good night's sleep. Got a question from Phoebe. I'm giving up sugar. I'm finding my skin is more irritable with eczema. Is that also part of metabolic stress?
Yeah, so absolutely. And okay, so this is, I mean, I feel for you, but this is actually really, really cool because this is a practical example of the gut bacteria and how they affect us. So the bad bacteria in our gut, right? I've said many, many times today already that they live on sugar. And if you are giving up sugar and you are taking away their food source, how do you think they're going to react? They are going to, be kicking and screaming, crying out for their food, trying to do whatever they can to get you to have sugar, right? Sugar cravings. But when they still aren't provided with that, it's kind of like a bit of a revolt. They are not going to be very happy, and they are going to be producing almost overtime in your gut. They are infighting. It is almost like a necessary rite of passage to kicking them out. And I've seen this many, many times, not just with clients, but even with my brothers as well, who I kind of guided through this gut health journey as well. They had the same thing, skin, not necessarily eczema, but like a lot of dandruff, a bit of eczema and psoriasis around like behind the ears and things. All happened when they started doing this, but with time they stuck to it and it all just plateaus off and goes away. It's just these bad bacteria are really, really unhappy that they are starving. And obviously that also means that a lot of these bad bacteria which are dying in your gut, when something, I hope no one's eating dinner, but when something dies, right, it has to decay, it has to break down, and it's waste, basically. So you've got all of this bacterial waste in your gut that your body then has to clean up and get rid of. And sometimes it's going to soak through and your body has to digest all of these toxins that come from these dead bacteria. So absolutely, it's very normal to not just have like a flare up from eczema, for example, but breakouts of pimples and whatnot in that first time period. Absolutely normal. Our skin generally is a pretty good reflection of what is going on in our gut. And so if your body is dealing with a lot of toxins, in this case, it would be from these dead bacteria, then your skin is going to reflect that short term. But as things start to clean up, then your skin will reflect that as well and start to become a lot more vibrant, you could say.
Great. Oh, that was really interesting. Thanks for asking the question, Phoebe. I learned something there. Now we've got a couple of other questions, and you might be able to touch on them briefly regarding sleep. But just to reiterate, we will be having a whole session next week on sleep. Question from Chris: how does gut health affect sleep? I've had insomnia all my adult life. I've given up sugar and alcohol this month. However, aren't a big user of either normally. So do you want to comment on that, Sean, briefly, and then we can maybe talk in more detail next week?
Yeah, so in terms of sleep, gut health, so a lot of what it contributes to, in terms of when you want to sleep, you want to be relaxed, right? You want to, that's your time to repair, to shut off. The thing that is going to stop your sleep the most is if you're very agitated and you can't fall asleep, right? Because then you're just not getting enough. But it's also the quality of your sleep. Now, sleep is not just about being unconscious. Okay, this is why if you pass out drunk, you're not actually sleeping. Sleep is a chemical process in the brain and in the body, and it is controlled by the brain. Now, because, and I believe I briefly mentioned this already, maybe in the first video, because your brain is the largest collection of neurons in the body, right? It's a lot of neurons all tightly packed together, right, up in your head. There is another huge collection of neurons, which we can deem as the second brain around your gut. Now, what happens to your gut brain will happen to the brain up here. So if your gut is unhealthy, right, whether it be from something that's affecting your gut lining, could be from the microbiome, but it is inflamed. The brain around the area, because inflammation is going to be localized there, the brain around your gut is going to be inflamed. And because these two brains in our body are so tightly interconnected by literally what is like a highway of neurons, so a highway of brain cells that link the two biggest brains in our body, if your gut brain is inflamed, then the brain in your head is going to be inflamed. And if this one's inflamed, not only are you going to feel more agitated because there's inflammation in your head where essentially your personality exists and your thinking exists, that's going to make it harder to sleep because you're more agitated, but also it will interfere with the chemical process of sleeping. All the hormones and chemicals that are aligned with that, you can imagine if there's more activity up in your head with just all your blood cells expanding, there's less room, you can get pressure headaches, there's more chemicals flowing around your brain because they're coming from your gut. So that is going to have a direct influence on the chemical process of sleeping. So you're going to get lower quality sleep, but it also potentially is harder to sleep. So that's how your gut will interfere with your sleep. And it's not because necessarily your gut keeps you up, but it's just because it's not with the gut lining, essentially, it's the brain around the gut, which is so close to the gut lining and is affected by it, then has an effect on your brain and therefore your sleep. So it's almost like a 2-degree relationship, but it does have an impact, absolutely. So if you're improving your gut health, you will find sleep something that benefits from this.
Great, thanks, Sean. And question from Ashton, what if you feel more tired if you sleep 8 or more hours? Is it okay to sleep 7 to 7.5 hours?
7.5 is actually, I mean, we say 8 because generally it takes you a little bit of time to fall asleep, and it's kind of like a bit of a safety net. But generally 7.5 hours is actually okay. It's better to aim for 8 to 9, but it's not usually realistic for everyone. 7.5 is acceptable, and that's because a sleep cycle, so that's technically going through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and REM stage of sleep, that's about 1.5 hours. So you're supposed to have 5 of those in a 24-hour period, which is 7.5 hours. Now we just say 8 because it's like a 30-minute safety net, just in case you miss a bit. It takes you a bit longer to fall asleep, or you get to bed not quite on time, that kind of thing. So 7.5 is fine. If that's the amount of sleep that you have that you then feel best, listen to your body. Anything less than 7.5 hours sleep, I wouldn't recommend. And that's just, I mean, yeah, I can talk about that in the sleep video tomorrow, because it's a bit of it's a bigger topic, but basically that the human body requires 5 sleep cycles a night in order to function normally.
Great, thanks, Sean. And as Sean said, and I said just a bit earlier, our next webinar next Monday night, not tomorrow, Sean, you're a bit ahead of yourself there, but next Monday night we'll be talking about sleep in more detail and some tips for improving your sleep. So if you're interested in learning more about that and the importance of it to our overall health, then do tune in next week, 7 o'clock. We'll be sharing the link with you all ahead of that. So we'll just see if we've got any more questions coming in. Certainly, I've learned a lot tonight, Sean. I've listened to you speak the last couple of years for Give It Up for these webinars. There's always something new that you share that I learn, and very insightful, and we really appreciate your support of the campaign and joining us on Monday evenings to share your knowledge and help us all through the Give It Up challenge, and giving us really valuable tips for improving our health in the long term. So really, really grateful to you, Sean.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. And if you guys are sitting there like nodding along, interested, and I can turn you into a bit of a health nerd like me, because it is interesting, I think. Then all the better. And
at this point, I'm going to give a plug for Sean. If you've enjoyed Sean's webinars, do look him up on 4wheelsofhealth.com. He regularly runs detailed courses, month-long courses for health education and weight loss programs. So if you've enjoyed these sessions with Sean through the Give It Up Challenge, do look into that. When's your next course, Sean?
Next course is on the 8th of April.
Oh, perfect. So for people transitioning from Give It Up that want to keep hearing more insights and knowledge, go and look that up on 4wheelsofhealth.com.
A heads up, it is covering a lot more topics as well. So it is quite a lot of information. And if that's something that you're interested in, then by all means, come and check us out. But it's definitely very intensive in terms of learning. So brace yourself.
Great. Okay, well, we haven't got any more questions coming in. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a bit of a longer session this evening, but really enjoyed again your insights, Sean. And thank you to Liam as well for joining us and giving us a great overview on how the funds that you're raising through Give It Up are making such a huge impact to New Zealanders with gut cancer. The session tonight has been recorded, and we will share that out both in the Facebook group, via email, and a blog post on the Give It Up website. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you 7 o'clock next Monday evening for a session on sleep. So have a good week. We're nearly halfway through the challenge, so celebrate midweek with something healthy, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone.